If there's one thing that has changed pretty fundamentally is the fact that now we have a whole lot more ways in which we can figure ourselves out in the context of the digital world. And the best example of that is in the improvement of our methods. That up until very recently, when it came to looking at people, we had the few options to do so. The number one being to travel around, the number two being to record on tape. And, sometimes you would lose that tape or you would misplace it. And those things were very sensitive and not particularly reliable. Now that we have technology to do this work, we also have a much better, much more efficient way to do our work. And when it comes to our health, we also have a lot more tools to monitor our health. And this is an example from an article from the 1970s looking at the ways in which it would be possible to monitor the muscular capacity and the exercise fitness of athletes. 16 intercollegiate runners were marked at reference points of the body pertinent to the study and filmed while twice running, one on the flat horizontal surface, two uphill on the 10% slope, and three downhill on a 10% slope at the constant velocities of 11, 16, and 21 feet per second. With the use of cinematographic techniques, appropriate data were extracted from the film so that either they or their modification yielded the 14 mechanical elements of the running stride under scrutiny. All measurements were extracted with reference to the running surface as opposed to the horizontal surface. And in here to look at the biological, physical, or perhaps the more even the philosophical implication of athletics, you would have to take into account the entirety of the performance of an athlete, looked at it at a very close range, and perhaps look at it through filming in this case. Now, today, of course, we have a much higher resolution camera and we have all kinds of sensors that can be put on people, and those would be our way to look at this and to monitor how well people are doing for the slope, looking at their exertion, looking at their breath, and whatever. And in and of itself, that is something that we are able to improve through our technology, but we are also a lot more aware of the technology being there for ourselves. For example, if we need to find clues about our own health, then we might find an app for that, or we might be able to look at ourselves using our own cameras without having a scientist to do this. One new thing, perhaps, that you could have realized in the past 5 years or so is the fact that we are a lot more able to measure things, and we tend to find a lot of comfort in measuring things. For example, the time that you have to wash your hands during the COVID-19 pandemic. How long does it take to wash your hands in an appropriate manner that would get rid of a virus on your hands? So you have a way to perhaps sing the happy birthday song or maybe count to a certain number. Well, this is a way that you can monitor your own performance for the principle of health, and this is, in its most basic way, a matter of digital anthropology. But for a much larger scale of research, we have better sensors that are smaller, that are more accurate. We have much more powerful computing. We have our cell phones, actually, that are our computers now that we are carrying everywhere. We have social media that allow us to see what other people are saying about their selves, even some social media that is based around exercising. And of course, there is this larger way in which that data can be shared all the way across the world through the internet. And that in and of itself is also a practice that was very early on explored by people who were interested in how exactly people are living their lives and what is the most interesting, at the same time, the most mundane activity that people can do, and how much of that can be tracked for one in matter or the other. The example here of Ellie Harrison, who is an artist who recorded information about everything she ate for a year. She published the images on her blog, and through the year, people were able to see pictures of her eating, see pictures of what she was eating, and looking at how those things would be informing her behavior, perhaps as is pointed out here, to change her eating habits, things that she might not have realized she was eating, or things that she might have not realized she was eating in large amounts, became very evident through that daily documentation. And of course, because it was designed as an art piece, it was talked about a little bit throughout the world as an art piece, and it became a lot more widespread as a way for people to look at the way they were doing things. It became imitated, and eventually, this series of picture became a movie. It became part of a photo exhibition and whatever. This is, in its most basic form, a matter of big data that is created by this one person about themselves, which could also be applied to other methods once there is the technology to do so on a larger scale. And that same artist decided to do the same thing about um, her subway trips, about other things that might work for her life. And obviously, you can look at the way that you do everything else and kind of look at this as an ethnography of yourself if you have the time and the effort to devote to this. That also has inspired a lot of people to do a lot of other things about their own life, about their own activity. And even if you have some matter of knowledge about a subject, you have the possibility to apply those techniques to yourself. Here, an example of a doctor who was diagnosed with cancer at an early age, and 48 years old, and to put himself on a path of recovery, started to do the things that he would have done with any of these other patients that he has, except he did it for himself. Lawrenceburg had a sober outlook on life, a 40-year-old physician whose career has centered on treating seriously ill patients. Berg was diagnosed with cancer in December 2006, yet despite his clinical experience, he has taken an extraordinary step to try to rid himself of his illness, a step many would consider to be a medical heresy. Berg is one of a growing number of patients who have been dosing themselves with a simple laboratory chemical that has never before been used to treat cancerous people. Most are doing so without the help of doctors, and none is enrolled in any systematic clinical trial of the substance. Instead, they are buying it over the internet and sharing their experience of it in an online chat room. For them, the unlicensed, untested drug represents their last best chance for survival. And of course, in that context, medicating yourself, and especially medicating yourself with an illegal drug, is not unique in any kind of way. People have been using illegal drugs to medicate themselves for a very long time. They have also been using regular drugs that are otherwise legal for other uses off label to see if those things would work. And the new thing here is the possibility to share the results, to do the clinical testing that would otherwise be done in a laboratory setting with very high scrutiny. Now it is being done by people who hopefully will be diligent enough about their work to report accurate results, and be a trustworthy uh, point of reference for the other people that are doing this testing. The thing is that the digital technology is allowing for this process to be much more largely, more quickly applied on a much larger scale than anything before. On the much lighter subject, too, there is the possibility of people using digital technology to just improve their physical activity if they want to exercise. The example here of the Wii Fit video game, launched in 2007, we're still within that same time period, of people being interested in working out, but not necessarily having the time to go out to a gym, or even having the facilities to exercise outside of their home. The Wii Fit game allows you to do yoga, strength training, aerobics, all kinds of mini games. And there's this specific controller, the pad that all of these model people are standing on here, that allows you to measure the results of the activity that you are doing, seeing how much time you are spending, where your pressure points are, how intense your level activity is, etc. Since this game was launched, it has been used even in hospital settings, even in physical therapy for children, for the elderly, because it is an affordable and available way for people to kind of have fun with their own physical health. Something that is a very new principle and something that is, again, very appealing outside of the more boring, more expensive forms of physical therapy that might exist out there. The Wii Fit is one of the best-selling console games that is not packaged with a console. Compared to the things that you would buy your gaming console with, this is something that comes separately with its own controller, and it remains one of the best-selling ones. Another pretty common way in which people are using this new development of technology is geo-tracking, using the computer chips that exist in cell phones to track where they are going, looking for places, for example. That also can be gamified through apps like Foursquare, which you may or may not remember, which allowed you to check into some places where you would have these incentives, and there's businesses for checking into places. Now, this same principle has been adopted by all kinds of other apps, of course, but the principle remained that there was a time on the internet where you could use an app specifically to show people where you were going and show how you were engaging with this or that business, and you would have those rewards of badges. So again, something that is gamified. And since then, our process for geo-tracking has been much improved. Now, as you can see, super accurate GPS chips coming to smartphones in 2018 have satellite signals to boost accuracy to 30 centimeters to 1 foot, essentially. Now, having this accuracy to 1 foot allows you a much larger amount of granular control than anything else that existed before. For example, to track your animals, to track your belongings, for example, with the tile systems and whatever. Through geocaching games where people would hide things in particular places with the GPS track, and you would have to find that thing somewhere, report on that thing you have found, and maybe go to another clue. There are movies about this if you are interested. There are the same principle is now also part of social media as a whole. WhatsApp as a way to send pins that is written in, kind of the same way that iPhones do. During the invasion of Ukraine, there were systems for geo tracking the troops of the Russian troops coming into Ukraine, or even the missile strikes in different places. So obviously, having this kind of technology at our disposal makes the creative use of technology and the creative use of the devices a lot more common than it has ever been at any point in time, which again allows people to be a lot more empowered with that kind of usage. The downside to that, it also means that if that data is being controlled by a corporation that gives it all kinds of um, nefarious uses as well. But by and large, there are ways to avoid that, but it is kind of a hygiene that people have to make. That being said, the idea of looking at your own data and gathering your own data for your own almost quasi-scientific purposes has been called inverse surveillance. And from the International Workshop on Inverse Surveillance, this is a list of the ways in which people can think of using this data in more or less practical ways, and of course the legal issues that come into that. That means paying attention to camera phones, pocket organizers with sensors, blogs, cyber blogs, also known as GOGs, wearing camera phones and personal imaging system, electronic eyeglasses, computational memory aids, recording experiences in which you are a participant, portable personal imaging and multimedia, wearable technologies and systems, ethical, legal, policy issues, privacy related technosocial issues, democracy and emergent democracy, protesters using organizing SMS cam phones, safety and security, technologies of lifelong video capture, personal safety devices and wearable black box recorders, research issues and people looking at people, person to person sharing in personal experiences, and the end of gender specific space. For example, blind man guided by wife, whose restroom would they go to? Now, this is an interesting way to formulate something that, if you are paying attention, really looks like the um, uh, methodological issues that are faced by anthropologists on a daily basis. And the fact that these things could be used for a matter of security by people who are ill intentioned, as opposed to things that are used for your own purposes as a person. And by the way, this list doesn't end here. There's also the aspects of subject right, ownership of photograph rather than the photographers, the reverse copyright, protect information recipient, not just the transmitted, interoperability and open standards of hardware in computers and software. Algebraic projective geometry from a first person perspective, object detection and recognition from a first person perspective, computer vision, Emotion, and wayfinding technologies, lifelong image capture, new devices and technology for ultra-miniature portable cameras, social issues for fashion, design, acceptability, and human factors, electronic news gathering and journalism, psychogeography, location-based wearable computing, augmented mediated diminished reality, empowering children with inverse surveillance, constructionist learning, creation of your own family album, and prevention of both bullying by peers and abuse by teachers and other officials. Of course, if you have the possibility to have the technology, you have the possibility to abuse it as well. But using the right kind of thinking, methodology, if you will, or approach on the much larger scale, you have the possibility as a person to become in charge of your own place in the world. This is kind of an interesting format here that is also known as surveillance as opposed to surveillance. So the surveillance system is generally understood as a more or less benevolent or more or less patriarchal view, if you will, where you have a person that is watching over you for whatever mistakes you may be making. Surveillance by the sense is kind of a subversion of the system where people have the possibility to look at the observers to reverse that power differential between people and their surroundings. And of course, for our purposes, that also means that people have the possibility to completely change their livelihood based on these things, at least as long as this remains a matter of a easy access to that data, because it is also a way in which you could very easily sink yourself into gathering that data, into trying to solve technical issues, into making sense of all of these different parameters without having a any kind of time for yourself.